Hello and welcome to the How to Thrive podcast. This podcast is hosted by me, Claire Sanders, and my sister and co-founder, Helen Silver McMahon. Together, we are on a mission to empower individuals and teams with the human skills they need to thrive, maximising performance, minimising risk, and optimising well-being. If you'd like to find out more about how we can help your practice, please get in touch via our website, www.being-human.co.uk. I'd like to take a moment to say a huge thank you to our sponsors for the How to Thrive podcast, Flank. Flank is your in-house legal team's first AI colleague. Flank introduces AI native agents who are designed to integrate seamlessly into your existing systems, empowering legal teams like yours to work smarter. They instantly resolve commercial team requests, eliminate bottlenecks, and enable your legal team to operate at the speed the business needs. But this is just the beginning. At Flank, they firmly believe that the future isn't simply about better software. It's about building towards a future where fully autonomous AI colleagues will own entire workflows end to end, deeply embedded into your tools and systems. This is the new generation agentic engine that's redefining what's possible for in-house legal. If you'd like to find out more about Flank, have a look at getflank.ai. And if you get in touch with them, please do mention How to Thrive, so that they know that it came from one of our wonderful listeners.
One of my favourite quotes by Socrates actually talks about the meaning of life, and it's to know oneself. It's coaching, but with a framework.
Greetings from the future, Helen.
Pardon?
I knew it. I just put that in because you always expect me to say, hello, how are you? So I thought I was going to throw a curveball in today. Greetings from the future. But also, there is method to my madness. We are recording this in advance of half term, which is happening next week when everybody will be hearing this. But I will hopefully be, I'm going to say hopefully up a mountain in the Lake District, knowing full well that instead I'll be chasing my children probably around a soft play because it's due to pour with rain the whole week. But never mind. Anyway, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm a little bit befuddled because I'm now thinking, are we talking in the future or the past?
Just talk for the now. Be in the present, Helen.
Yes, let's be grounded and present. Let's do that. Oh dear, I'm very well, thank you. No sign of rain here, although it's bank holiday weekend, so let's face it, it's probably on the horizon. What
have you been up to? What have you been doing?
What have I been doing? Well, a little bit of a different week this week, because I've been back in clinical practice on Monday and Tuesday. A friend was getting married, and so she needed someone to cover her role in practice, and so she called me. And I don't often get the excuse. When people ask me or I think about doing clinical stuff, I remind myself that I'm trying to do a PhD and I should be concentrating on that and not getting distracted by doing fun stuff. Although the PhD obviously is fun, just to caveat that. I get excited by the idea of being in clinical practice, but when it's a special occasion, I dust off the scrubs and go do it. And I absolutely love it. I just so enjoy it. Being able to still sort of perform technically and remember everything I have to remember is just really fills me up. So yeah.
Oh, I'm glad. I guess it's quite important though, isn't it? I mean, like I still practice a bit of law too for startups and things, and I think it is quite like important for what we do and kind of our ethos at being human. Like we want to be part of the industries that we support. You know, we might not always be able to do that, but where we can, we want to be part of it so that we're kind of in the trenches with the people that we're trying to, and the teams that we're trying to, engage with and support. I think it's really important to at least have some understanding.
Definitely. I completely agree. I think it's really important to be relatable, isn't it? And I think there's nothing more powerful than being able to translate information into a language that people understand, so that you can really help them kind of feel how they'll be able to put it into practice.
Yeah. And it all changes so quickly as well. I don't know if that's the same in the veterinary industry, but in the legal industry, stuff seems, it's slow. I mean, it's not exactly the most dynamic industry, but equally stuff does change. I mean, I now find myself saying, when I was a trainee, and everyone looks at me like I'm about a gazillion years old because I'm talking about things like, actually dropping stuff off at courts for court deadlines, and people are like, you do what?
Yeah.
Or, actually signing physical documents, and these are kind of crazy ideas that were carried out when I trained, which is also, I think, why it's important to still be relatable to the profession as it is now. I was at the Law Society last night, so that was all very austere. The lady who showed me up to the room said to me, "Oh, do you come to the Law Society a lot?" I said, "Well, I got my practicing certificate in 2007, and this is the second time I've been." And she was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Goodness, I never really associate. Like, I never really go to the Law Society. I feel like it's probably this actually resource that not many lawyers go to, but I think that's probably a reason, and that is because it's quite represented in the in-house community, so mainly private practice lawyers. But I was there to talk about resource management and the place of humans in resource management. So I quite enjoyed getting on my little soapbox about how we need to maximize human performance, as well as thinking about how we can use other resources like tech or like matter management and those sorts of things. So yeah, that was quite fun.
Sounds interesting.
Very fun. It was interesting. It was. Yeah. So today, though, what are we doing today? We're talking to Emma Roche, who is she is the philosophical lawyer. No, she's not. She's the philosophical coach, but she is also a lawyer. So she kind of is a philosophical lawyer. But really, we're talking to her in her guise as a philosophical coach today. Really interesting, really flows with kind of, I think, or certainly my kind of, I guess my energies around kind of the philosophy inspired way of thinking and being. So yeah, really awesome conversation that hopefully comes through, and as always we'll be at the other side of it, waffling on, hopefully with some thoughts. Have a great half term, everybody.
Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to this week's How to Thrive episode. I'm super excited to be here. Helen, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Had my lunch in the sunshine.
Perfect. It's always a happy day when the sun shines out and you can picnic outside. And we are joined this week by the fabulous Emma Roche. Emma Roche, pronouncing correctly?
Emma Roche. Yeah.
Emma Roche. Do you know what? When I got married, I became Claire Sanders, and I thought all my troubles were gone with pronouncing surnames. But oh wow, like Saunders, you name it, I get it. So Emma Roche, brilliant. It is lovely to have you here. Emma and I have kind of like, we're one of those LinkedIn connections that we sort of feel like, I don't know, we share so many of the same kind of people on LinkedIn, and the more we followed each other, we thought, do you know what I mean? We seem to be aligned in our beliefs around human beings, and we are both lawyers as well. So seemed like a perfect opportunity. And when we finally spoke, I just fell in love with everything you were saying, Emma, and the way that you're saying it. So I knew that I wanted to share with Helen, but with our audience as well. So welcome aboard the How to Thrive podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So Emma, for the benefit of our listeners, we always start with the same question, and that is kind of what brought you to where you are now. So I guess a potted history of your journey so far.
It's probably useful to start maybe 5 or 6 years ago, because it all started with how I felt. And I have 2 children, and I'm renovating this beautiful thatched property. I met my husband 22 years ago at law school, and I thought, I just don't feel quite right. I didn't feel depressed, but I just didn't feel quite right. And I thought, I just need to get underneath that. And so I picked up a book that I was given in, I don't know, beginning of 2000 or something, and it was Constellations of Philosophy by Elaine de Botton. And I'd always loved philosophy, and I'd always, from, I don't know, 10 onwards probably, I'd always ask these sort of fundamental questions. And then I thought, how can I combine like practical philosophy with coaching? That really sort of philosophical style inquiry, but with the coaching and the incisive questions, the listening. So I kind of looked into it and thought I could really offer something different here. And I'd known how much it helped myself, because I then found an existential coach. There's not many, but I found what I called Yannick Jacob, who was brilliant. And I embarked on this 2-year coaching program that was coaching, but with this sort of philosophical lens. And so, anyway, so I became a philosophically informed coach, and I didn't set out to coach lawyers, but actually I thought, I am a lawyer. I can resonate with what it's like to be a lawyer in private practice. I'm married to a lawyer. And so I just started on this path, and now I coach individuals, and I coach and I do sort of webinars to introduce these philosophical concepts and how they can help people practically.
Wow. So let's take it back for those who are listening, myself included. So I think I know what philosophy is. I've got some idea about what a philosophically, I can't even say the word, philosophically informed coach might be about, but educate me. So, and also about, like, when you were talking about, like, you were looking for an existential coach, like, you know, I'd be fascinated to understand a bit more about that. But how does the philosophical approach play into your coaching?
So philosophy is just love of wisdom. That's how it's translated. Okay, so it's thinking. It's all about thinking and how best we can think. Okay, so it's the love. It's kind of asking question after question to kind of elicit a truth, I guess. So people talk about Socratic dialogue, Socratic being, you know, Socrates, where he just asked question after question to get to the nugget of something. And so philosophical inquiry is coaching. So it's listening, it's asking the right questions, and it's giving people a space and a framework to do that. The philosophical comes in it for me. I think the premise for me was this one of my favorite quotes by Socrates actually talks about the meaning of life, and it's to know oneself. And so for me, the coaching approach isn't kind of a growing model. It isn't about goals. It's about it's understanding who we are. And I think it helps that it's embedded in philosophical themes, which I'll kind of come on to, and it's kind of 3,000 years old. So there's some comfort that these fundamental questions have always been asked by the likes of Aristotle or Marcus Aurelius or Socrates or Nietzsche in the case of existentialism. And so it's coaching, but with a framework. Okay. And so existentialism, all that means is what it means to be human, what it means to be you. And it's about being you and being an authentic you and not doing. Okay, so that's all existentialism means. And it means kind of embracing the human condition. And the other part of existentialism is accepting the responsibility that we are responsible for making our own choices. No one is going to do it for us. You know, it's about this kind of liberating, actually saying, you know, we are responsible for ourselves. And then the Stoic theme is this idea that that we shouldn't worry about what we can't control. You know, so Saracens Rugby Club now have kind of Stoic philosophy lessons on this kind of Stoicism, and they talk about, having to have habits and discipline being our destiny and that sort of thing, in terms of we have to repeat things. It's like Atomic Habits, you know, by James Clear. But that's all based in kind of Stoicism. Cognitive behavioral therapy was all based in Stoicism. You know, we are our thoughts, we are our choices. So it's kind of an inquiry, but without me sort of telling them anything about philosophy, really, other than when it comes up in themes. It's grounded basically on kind of unveiling who we are. And I think these philosophical premises really help. And Aristotle talks about this concept of eudaimonia, which is flourishing, you know, and flourishing and growth. And we have to fulfill our potential and our purpose. And to know that, we have to know what we're good at and what we love. And he talks about, you know, he has this practical way of talking about it. And he talks about going to your deathbed and working your way back about what it is that you don't want to regret. And that really focuses the mind when you're thinking about what matters and what you value and what choices you're making. So all of these themes sort of interlinked really help someone kind of fine tune where they're going, and you kind of dip into their past. So I don't deal with any trauma. I'm not a trained therapist, but you have to dip into someone's past and their loves and what they felt passionate about and reading my sixth form leavers book and who I was at 6, 16, 17, 18 informs who I am now. Our past is our prologue to who we are. So it's got a different depth to it.
We were talking about this earlier, actually, Helen and I, about the how this identity that we build for ourselves, and that crosses industries. Like, I am a lawyer. That's who I am, and the same with the veterinary industry. And I am a vet, or I am a veterinary nurse, and it becomes our identity. But actually, being able to separate your role from your identity means that you can find purpose outside your professional role, because I think that's where I got lost. I was like, well, if I'm not a lawyer, what am I? Like, who am I? Taking that time and that space to go, but who am I? It's very hard to find that space, I think, in today's society.
Yeah, no, I think it's just how we show up, isn't it? And I think it's so easy to have those outside influences. I know that I'm a great people pleaser, so I like to mold myself, but sometimes in situations I move away from actually where I feel comfortable and what sits nicely with me as my values and how I want to show up in the way that maybe is expected. And then that creates this kind of dissonance that's really unhelpful. So no, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think we live in quite a consumerist society now. That's kind of undeniable. But I think even the wellbeing sector's become quite consumerist. So you read a self-help book that you don't finish, and all these that say, like, exercise, meditation, having a candlelit bath. These are really important things to do to help you feel more calm and less anxious, and all the reasons they are good for you. And exercise is kind of self-explanatory. But I think what we don't do enough of is thinking without distractions. So, walking without any sound, without any music or podcasts, and treating thinking time like exercise, and making it habitual, and, doing a big piece of work in dialogue. And I think it has to be in dialogue with someone, because you kind of have to have someone hold a mirror up to yourself. And so it's easy to distract ourselves from sitting with ourselves. And I think philosophy helped me when I was feeling like this. This is where all of this began, like, just from me feeling, like, who am I if I'm not a lawyer and not a mother and not a wife? Because it's all I'd ever known, trainee all the way through. And I really had to get underneath that. And this really kind of distracted, and we know that we're distracted, but what is important to ask is why we're distracted. Like, holidays are wonderful and getting away with your family, but if you're not feeling existentially sound, and what I mean by that is who you are, and not necessarily where you're going long term, but like making decisions through who we are, like authentic decisions. They're not good decisions if we don't know who we are, because we don't know what decisions we're really making. They have to be intentional. And so holidays are brilliant and they're short term, but if you do this work with yourself, you actually have a liberation and a freedom much more of the time. You can't massage out existential angst, you can't swim it, you can't run it out. And it's really hard. But the fact that it was being discussed and talked about as a really Socrates drinking hemlock for it, what it means to be you, and reflective practice and contemplative practice. A life unexamined isn't worth living, was what Socrates spoke about. And that helps us. That helped me, the original guru, health and well-being guru, go to 81 and what don't you want to regret? And that, honestly, that helped me make so many decisions.
Do you think, like, one of the things we hear now about the generational differences and Gen Z coming into the workplace and far more driven by purpose and values, And I think in some respects that terrifies companies because they think, not necessarily companies who have a very strong purpose and a very, for example, they might be very sustainability driven or in the third sector, and charitable. But I think for some of the professional services businesses, it's actually terrifying because they're like, well, how can we have a purpose and how can we have a value that will resonate with an individual value? But listening to you just now makes me think, actually, I think we might be missing the point. I think the point is to empower the Gen Z and the future generations to understand their own purpose and their own values and realize that not every aspect of their job has to align perfectly, so long as deep rooted they are aligned and they understand it.
Yeah, and I think making the intentional choice, not sleepwalking through life, and so going, I'm okay with this, I'm okay with what I'm doing because I'm doing X and because I know who I am, rather than just kind of, closing your eyes and hoping for the best.
And that's going to become more and more important. I really think like this whole critical approach, like talk about a key skill. I mean, Helen, you've got, teenagers, 17 and 14. My kids are much younger. I think it sounds like yours are in the middle, Emma. And I think certainly of all the skills that I think the future generation is going to need, it's going to be this critical evaluation, not just taking everything that they read as kind of gospel and saying, I'm not sure this is asking why. Yeah,
asking why and then coming up with something themselves, rather than something that they've heard or they've been told. I mean, Yuval Harari, in his book, he wrote his Homo Sapiens, didn't he? But he did 21st lessons for the 21st lessons for the 21st century or something. And he spoke about philosophy as being really fundamental. But yeah, I mean, the critical thinking point is so key, but it's helpful to us. It develops us as people and individuals, doesn't it? I think when we think deeply about who we are. How do you like your eggs? What do you, if you drink alcohol, what do you like in your gin and tonic? Is it a lemon or a lime, or maybe a grapefruit, like just knowing things about yourself.
That's what makes us human. That's what we are. There isn't a one size fits all. We are all different. We have different likes and dislikes. I think that's, it should be embraced, but we have to inquire to know that. So one of the things we were talking about before we started recording was about this work that you've done with Smart About Health, which sounds really fascinating as well. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so it's quite a brave approach for law firms to sort of embrace it, really. And Trowers and Hamlins don't mind me saying, because I've asked to mention it. But so I did these series of 3 webinars with Trowers and Hamlins, with 30 or 40 lawyers on each one, and it was a part of their partnership wellbeing program with Smart About Health that was founded by Dr. Laura David, and she goes into different law firms to talk about health issues and mental health issues, and brings in different experts, psychologists, psychiatrists, coaches, to raise awareness on different things and just to help people build resilience, I guess, in quite a demanding profession such as law. And I met Laura because she came and she did a talk on bowel cancer, I think, at my previous firm, and I just loved her. I thought she was great and what she was doing, and I reached out to say, actually, I've just retrained as a philosophical coach, but I'm still practicing law, and it'd be great to have a conversation. She said, have you ever thought about doing something with lawyers with me? And so we did these 3 series. But I think for me, what I wanted to just leave with them was how, if you get to know yourself and you spend time with yourself and you put thinking space in regularly and you make it habit, how that in itself, without doing anything else, is transformative to the way you live professionally and personally.
I was going to ask, because I'm just a bit curious listening to this, how much reflective practice do you do as lawyers? Is it something that you are... let me take it back a step. Okay, within the veterinary profession, we have to do a certain amount of hours of continued professional development. And as part of that, to claim that, we have to have demonstrated reflective practice. So we have to have reflected on what we've learned. And so it kind of is brought into the practice of how we work. Is that something that lawyers are used to doing?
Do you want to answer, Claire?
In my experience, my humble experience, I would say no. And I think it should be. And, I'm all for encouraging lawyers to do far more, if they need the sexy, startup language or the project management language of doing retrospectives and all of that. Yes, they need to do more of it. There's nowhere near enough reflection. And a lot of that, I think, comes from when you're in-house, the constant pressure to be doing rather than, going back to your point, Emma, it's like be doing rather than being. And I think where you can speak way more, on a way more informed basis about private practice, but in private practice, there isn't a bill about our code for reflection. It's, again, it goes down to the doing. I mean, Emma, is that your thoughts too? I mean, you're a lot closer to it than me.
Yeah, I think we should really encourage reflective practice. And I think there's a coach called Nancy Klein, and she talks about a thinking environment where you have to create an environment to help people think. And it's hard sometimes to think as lawyers because there's urgency, and it's hard to think as clearly when something's really urgent. But she talks about the listening. So, a partner listening to a more junior lawyer, but really listening and saying, I'm going to listen for however long, and then ask another question and anything else, just to get them keep thinking, okay, and put them at ease. So make it an environment where it's easy for them to feel comfortable thinking, and make it habitual. And so create it, and then you're going to get better lawyers as a result, because they're going to see seen and they're going to be valued. And so if a junior lawyer comes to me and says, and I will do the same, by the way, Emma, can you help me with what do you think? And I'll say, what do you think? And I won't help until they've kind of thought about it for themselves in a really positive way, and say, what do you think? I would like to see more of this thinking environment in private practice. And it's something that came up and I spoke about with Trowers, actually. But again, we have to have it embedded in culture, and it has to be lived and breathed rather than just be on a value sheet, on the intranet. Because I think it would transform culture and practice to a degree if it was done really well.
I think so.
I think there's substantial evidence that reflective practice is actually fairly essential for good performance. And I would argue that I'm quite shocked that it doesn't seem to be within your profession already, because I think you're absolutely right. It's key to create the right environment for it. But I think it's essential. I think it's something that we have to move towards. I don't think there's any profession, I think it's easy to say we're too busy. I would imagine that healthcare professionals and veterinary professionals probably would also feel similar. But it's interesting when it's mandated that you have to do it, that you have to find that time.
I completely agree with you. And I mean, I worry about CPD even in the legal practice area, because I feel that it's been watered down to such an extent. It used to be that you had to have a certain number of CPD points, which I know is the same as, say, the veterinary profession. And now it is so... you self-evaluate, like when you resubscribe, where you renew your practicing certificate, you tick a box to say I've done enough CPD, tick. And so it's not regulated, and because of that, it's not really encouraging the right practices. I think there's an argument that people should be doing it for themselves anyway, but this is reality. And if people can't say to their bosses, like, I have to do this because I haven't got enough CPD points, then they have to go and do it, rather than kind of this get out of jail free card. But I agree with you. I think this whole reflective practice time is really important. It goes down as well to what we've spoken about before about blocking out. We talk to people who block out focus time, which again is, I think, incredibly important, giving yourself that space to think. And people will say, yeah, that just gets eaten into. People see focus time and they just book stuff over the top of it. And you're like, this is nuts. Like, how can you deliver advice? Like, how, the same in the veterinary, how could you be possibly expected to deliver treatment if you haven't had the opportunity to think about it first? It's a interesting, and maybe, Emma, with the juniors, I love that, like asking that question back, reflecting the question back to them of, well, what do you think?
Helping them
permission
grow. Yeah, exactly. And being available to actually offer that environment. I think what you're saying, having people come to you and be able to offer that, but in a safe space where you can kind of have a bit of a exploratory to and fro of actually, what does this mean to me? How do I show up for this? And what do I really think? And what knowledge have I got there that I can apply and work through? I think that's so powerful, isn't it? In every setting to do that.
I wonder if it also goes down to this vulnerability point and how sometimes as lawyers we don't want to accept our weaknesses, or accept that we have weaknesses, we don't know. And so almost by saying, can I have some time to think about that? It's because we're having to do that uncomfortable thing of saying, I don't know, but that's absolutely human and absolutely normal. And, we can't know everything. And actually the responsible thing to do is take that time to think about it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that came out with coaching particular lawyers is that when they've done some work on themselves, they really lead by example, and it's clear that they're making decisions through what they value. And, like there's a particular partner who will just turn his phone off when he goes away for a week or 2 weeks, and two of their values on this webinar was honesty and supportiveness. And the reflective practice piece, thinking about it, is as important, isn't it? Personally, it is professionally, for similar reasons. But when you're doing it personally, you're doing it for your life. You're doing it for your, which travels through everything. How we show up as a parent, how we show up as a lawyer, how we show up as a friend. 5 or 6 years ago, when I was talking about, I had constant irritability, and you could blame it on the children not putting their shoes on, or your husband being 2 hours late or an hour late, or not having enough milk in the fridge. But there's this low level kind of what's going on, and with reflective practice, you get underneath this stuff. So it's as important personally as it is professionally, I would say. And I try to put thinking time in the diary every week now. And, it's not sort of officially in the diary, but, I make ways of doing it. And it should be treated like exercise, I think, because you just need to know why you're distracted and why you allow yourself to be distracted.
I was going to say, do you, when you go for a walk with the purpose of thinking time, do you ask yourself questions, or do you just let your mind wander and see what comes up for you? What kind of tips can you give people on that kind of thing?
Well, I think if you've got something on your mind and it's and it's niggling and you're like, that's really bothering me, and you just put it to one side because you can't deal with it because you've got things going on, then maybe you focus on that and you go, how can I get through that? How can I untangle that? So you can take one issue, but then I think the other way is just to kind of let's see what comes up. And it's amazing what can come up. And the most important thing generally comes to the top, or the things that you're most worried about. I think what's key is making it habit and making it regular and making it something, because you get better at it if you flex that thinking muscle. And just don't have anything with you. Don't have any phones with you. Don't have any music. I think that's what's key. And I think the more you do it and the more the value you see you get from it, you'll then want to keep doing it. I mean, the other day, the train was stuck, and it was stuck for an hour. So I was just sat still for an hour, and my phone died because my battery's dying anyway. But my phone died, and actually, I had a pen and paper in my bag, and it was such a great hour. It was, oh my God, my phone's died. You know, no one's going to have to contact me. My husband will have to, all the rest of it. And actually, it was a real gift.
Emma, I could talk to you all day about this. I feel like there's such a, I've got so many, for a start, I've got like a long list of philosophical people, for scholars that I want to, I should look at more. I find them quite intimidating, like, oh, I can't imagine reading a book by, I don't know, Socrates. Maybe I'll start with Big Ideas for Curious Minds. That might be more my level, and maybe build up. Really, really, really fascinating. Now, we ask all of our guests to leave us with 3 top tips for thriving, and they can be, professional, personal, whatever floats your boat. So, Emma, what are your top 3 tips for thriving?
Okay, so I think in summary, it's kind of what I've been saying, really. And I think you could break it down to kind of like know yourself, own yourself, and be yourself. Okay, so the first one, they can all be little, but know yourself. That's about like getting underneath who you are, just asking questions to yourself, like, what do I stand for? Asking someone else, but just starting to do their work. Understand who you are, okay, and what you love and what you're good at. So be yourself. That is living through who you are. And the third one, be yourself. That's reflexive practice.
Know yourself, own yourself, and be yourself. Emma, it was such a wonderful conversation. Really, really rich. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I actually feel this real sense of calm. which is lovely, and I think there's such an important place for this within practice. It sounds actually like the veterinary practice is a bit further ahead potentially, with kind of certainly with the reflections, but I think I wonder whether things like the purpose and the values and knowing them yourself, I want to say know thyself, knowing yourself is actually something that probably encompasses both across all professions, as we could all work on for sure.
We can all get better at this stuff, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You will all live happier, more fulfilled lives.
And on that note, thank you so much. Thank you. Welcome back, Helen. So we've just recorded our podcast with Emma, and I think we're both a bit like, oh, I've got so many books I want to read.
I know.
We were talking actually after we'd recorded, we've said, is there a book which is manageable for novices in this area? And she's suggested A Man's Search for Meaning, which is by Viktor Frankl, which I don't think is going to be the lightest read, but is Emma promises us will be accessible to our level. Readable, because I've got this book. Short and accessible and readable, because I showed this book that I was recommended, and I am sure it is brilliant because the person who recommended it to me is phenomenal, but it is something like, I don't know, I must be nearly 1,000 pages, very small typeface, no pictures at all, words are very close together, and I read about the first page and went, nah, and in a way that's what I feel like philosophy's like, but I don't think it is. I think it's this, it feels very sort of what's the word, like out of reach, but actually when you break it down into kind of the way that we live now and what a lot of us seek to achieve, it is all backed in philosophical approaches, which I think is really. Do
you know, if I decided to exit my PhD now, I would leave with a Master of Philosophy.
Really?
Well, a lot of what I do in my PhD is philosophical thinking. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I don't think I ever knew, and before I'd spoken to Emma, right, I don't think I ever knew what philosophy was. In fact, because it's one of those things, and it takes us right back, and we were talking about this in the podcast, that we never stop, right? We get on the academic bandwagon at the age of 5, and we keep on going until we decide what we want to do, and off we go. I never stopped to think about any, like, what is philosophy, which I suppose is a philosophical question in itself, but I never, because what did she say? It was the love of learning, or the something about, really interesting.
Yeah, I really really enjoyed listening to her. I've written, very annoyingly, I only had very small post-it notes, and I've written multiple small post-it notes, which is never great for my
Teeny tiny post-it notes.
I don't know why I've done that. That was a foolish thing to do.
But I think the overarching thing for me is just thinking space. I think this whole personal, professional, we need to build it in, and it's not skiving, it's not laziness, it's not weakness, it's none of those things. It's actually fully essential for reaching our full potential.
And I think there's, we know that reflective, not reflexive practice is really essential for our mental well-being, I think, as well. It's, there's evidence there to suggest that, if we can reflect on things when they haven't gone so well, then, hopefully we can actually work through it and then park it and move on from it. Whereas if we don't, we're just storing up all of this stuff, that's never worked out. So I think finding the time to do it, and I love the idea of just doing it whilst you're walking and stuff like that. I think it's not that we haven't got time to do it. I honestly believe it's the managing our distractions sometimes to make time to do it, to make a conscious choice, because there's probably a million other things we could be doing, but actually the benefit of doing it for both professionally and personally is immense.
I love that thing she said. It really resonated when she said, I don't fear death. I fear not living enough before I die.
Yeah, there was some amazing quotes that she said, wasn't there?
I thought that was really interesting. And do you know what it made me think? I just forget this. It's like, I think it was when I was 30, I hadn't long met my husband, Chris. And I was getting really upset about being 30. And it was more about, I didn't feel like I'd lived as much as I wanted to before I was 30, or I hadn't achieved as much, rather than being 30. And I mean, this shows the difference between us. His response was, you're going to be 30 at midnight whether you like it or not, so just get over it. That's the difference between us. Yes, rational fact. So yeah, and it kind of reminded me of that. It's like ages and stages are just, it's what you do with it that makes the difference.
And that it's interesting, isn't it? That, like, the consumerist trap we sometimes fall in is to measure wealth by finance or chattels, are things that we have, whereas actually I'm a big believer in the experience, and that, actually, where would we want to put our time, and actually what wealth do we get back from that? Is it wealth of knowledge or connection or well-being? Or, I think it's a different thing, isn't it? But I think, I find it quite thought-provoking.
No, I agree. And then, I absolutely, her three tips for thriving as well. Know yourself, own yourself, and be yourself.
Loved it.
I think that own yourself and having a Post-it note somewhere to remind you of like your top 5 values is just, I love that idea. I love it. Of like, and own it. And, and then be yourself, live through who you are. Just be authentic to who you are. That first step of, though, is know yourself. And to do that, you need to do that reflection and do the work that some of us find quite difficult. But
she was also saying that first one was knowing what you valued as well, wasn't it? What your values are and what you valued most. So I suppose that comes back to whether it's family or friendship or work, or what are those things that you really value, and what do you need to nurture and take care of. But yeah, really, really interesting.
Another fabulous podcast.
I know.
Goodness, I love doing this. What a privilege. Well, as always, lovely to chat. Great to record podcast. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for listening. Subscribe, follow, like, all the normal things. Give us your feedback. Let us know if there's anybody you would like us to talk to, or any recommendations of people you've heard who you think they would be an awesome guest. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Just before we say goodbye, I'd like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to Flank, our sponsor for the How to Thrive podcast. Without their support, it would be much, much harder for us to share the wonderful learnings from our guests. So thank you so much, Flank. And if you'd like to find out more about how they can support your legal operations, please go to getflank.ai. If you enjoyed the podcast, please check out our website at www.being-human.co.uk to find out how we can support you and your team to thrive.